The wind clawed across the plains like a restless spirit, stirring dust from the dry earth and bending the prairie grasses in whispers. Beneath the bone-colored sky, a crowd gathered around a pit dug cruelly into the ground. And there, in the center, buried to her neck, was Clara May Whitlock, her face red from sun, lips cracked, and eyes fixed somewhere far beyond the jeers and murmurs. The townsfolk stood not in pity, but in quiet satisfaction, as though her silence proved their righteousness. Her crime, as it was called, was rejection. Not of her own will, but of her worth. She had been promised, sold, truly, as a mail-order bride to Boaz Callahan, the large-framed rancher with a reputation as wide as his shoulders. The day she arrived, hands trembling around the hem of her travel-worn dress, Mrs. Geneva Stroud had been waiting at the depot with her tongue sharpened and ready. "That girl," she hissed to the townsfolk, "can't bear children. Took a fall off a horse years back. Womb's as empty as her future." The rumor, cruel and unconfirmed, moved faster than wildfire. By the time Clara reached Boaz's doorstep, the town had already made its decision. She was tainted. And he, a man with land but no legacy, was a fool for considering her. She hadn't even stepped inside his house before the whispers reached her ears. She saw it in his eyes, that hesitation, the flicker of doubt. Not anger, not cruelty, just the quiet betrayal of a man overwhelmed by other people's voices. So she turned and walked. No tears, no goodbye. Just wind in her hair and something broken in her chest. That night, the elders invoked the old punishment. "If a woman agrees to be a bride and breaks that promise," Geneva crowed, "let the earth receive her shame." It was tradition, they said, as if cruelty done long enough somehow wore the robe of justice. Her sister, Hazel, tried to fight them. She screamed and clawed and wept, but no one listened. Hazel, the older by 3 years, had always been the quieter one, the seamstress, the shadow. Clara had been the beauty, the light. And now, the spectacle. Boaz didn't come. He stood in the threshold of his barn, holding a saddle strap with both hands like a noose. He'd never asked for a spectacle, just a chance. But he hadn't spoken. He hadn't stopped them. And the silence was louder than any denial. Clara's body, half swallowed by earth, trembled under the setting sun. Her thoughts drifted to a memory. Hazel brushing her hair by candlelight when they were children, whispering that love wasn't loud. That it was steady. That someday, someone would see her as she was, not as she was judged. That night, Hazel didn't sleep. She watched the moon crawl across the sky and waited until the town lay under blankets and drunken snores. Then, she lit a lantern and rode through the black toward Boaz Callahan's ranch, a place she'd never dared visit before. She found him in the barn, shirt unbuttoned, belly round and unashamed, hands shaking as he tried to mend a broken stirrup. His eyes widened when he saw her, but he didn't speak. "She don't belong in that dirt," Hazel said softly. "But I know why you didn't stop it. They made you choose between her and your place in this town." He looked away. "Ain't no right way to be a man when the whole town's watchin'." Hazel stepped closer. "You don't have to marry me. I ain't here to trap you in her place. I just need you to help me get her out. Before the worms do." Boaz finally met her gaze. It was a long, searching look, like a man trying to find something lost in a face he didn't yet understand. "You ain't angry?" "I'm plenty angry," she replied. "Just not at you." He lit another lantern. Neither of them said anything more. They rode out together beneath a low-hanging sky, each breath carrying a thread of fear, of guilt, of quiet resolve. The field was colder now, the wind sharper. Clara's eyes fluttered when the lantern light reached her. She didn't speak, her lips were too swollen, but Hazel dropped to her knees and brushed the dirt from her sister's cheeks like a mother with a fevered child. Boaz kneeled opposite her and began digging with his bare hands. No shovel. No delay. Just fingers against earth, slow and deliberate. Clara blinked at him. Her throat moved as if to speak. "You don't owe me words," Boaz murmured. "I just need you out of this damn ground. When she was free, her body sagged like wet fabric. Hazel wrapped her in her shawl and held her close, the way she had when their father died. Boaz lifted her in his arms, gentle, reverent, and carried her to Hazel's horse. He rode beside them in silence, guiding them back to the tiny cottage on the edge of town. At dawn, the townsfolk woke to find the earth empty. No punishment, no spectacle. Geneva stood at the well, fuming like a volcano with no fire left to spew. Anarchy, she muttered. A town can't survive if women start deciding their own worth. At Hazel's home, Clara slept with her head on Hazel's lap while the older sister rocked her gently, humming a lullaby from their childhood. Boaz sat by the hearth, hands still stained with dirt. He looked different now. Not smaller, not thinner, but clearer, like something heavy had shifted off his chest. "I never rejected her," he said finally. "I know," Hazel whispered. "But silence ain't the same as kindness." He nodded. The fire cracked, sending shadows dancing across the room. Clara stirred, her fingers brushing Hazel's hand, then Boaz's. She didn't speak, but her eyes opened slowly, steady and clear. Then, as if summoned by something unspoken, she reached out and took his hand in hers. Boaz didn't flinch. Outside, the wind changed direction. The days that followed felt like walking barefoot across cracked porcelain, fragile, unsure, beautiful in a way only things nearly broken can be. Clara rested in Hazel's small back room, her strength returning in quiet stretches, her voice still rare as snow in summer. The townspeople kept their distance, though their stares burned hotter than the noon sun. Whispers sprouted like weeds, coiled and quick, outside Hazel's shutters, passed in bread lines, sharpened by Geneva Stroud's sour tongue. "They're making a mockery of marriage," she sneered to anyone who'd listen. "Trading sisters like milk jugs. And that rancher, lapping it up like cream." Hazel heard every word, though no one said it to her face. She walked with her head up and hands busy, stitching until her fingertips bled, repairing shirts and skirts and seams frayed by dust and disdain. She stitched to keep her mind quiet and her purpose steady. For Clara. For the girl who'd once danced barefoot on rain-wet wood, who now winced at her reflection and flinched from her own shadow. Boaz came most mornings. He brought eggs, firewood, silence. He never lingered long, never sat unless invited. He'd stand on Hazel's porch like a man visiting his past and unsure whether it welcomed him. She didn't rush him, didn't coax. She'd nod, offer him a cup of chicory coffee, and let the minutes bloom between them. One morning, after a trip to the mercantile, Hazel returned home empty-handed. The owner, Mr. Bledsoe, had refused to sell to her, mumbling something about keeping decent company. She'd smiled thinly, gathered her pride, and walked out with only her breath to her name. That evening, Boaz showed up with a sack of flour, 2 spools of thread, and a jar of blackberry preserves. "You didn't have to," she said, placing the items on her tiny table, trying not to let her voice crack. "I reckon I did," he replied, then added softly, "You looked like you needed something sweet." Hazel didn't cry. Instead, she reached for the thread and turned it over in her hand like it was made of gold. "Blue," she said. "The shade Mama liked." Boaz watched her, his eyes reflecting the low firelight. "That color suits you. Strong, soft, lasts through storms." From then on, their visits took root in quiet routine. Hazel would sew while Boaz repaired her broken fence posts or sanded her squeaky door. At night, they sometimes sat on the porch with a single lantern burning between them. The silence they shared was no longer heavy, it was sacred, like a prayer whispered in the dark. Clara began to heal in those hushes. She'd step out some evenings and sit at the threshold, still fragile, but her eyes clearer. She watched the rhythm between her sister and the rancher and said nothing. Not until one night, when Hazel brought her warm milk and a shawl, did she speak what had weighed on her chest like a stone. "You love him." Hazel didn't respond at first. She brushed Clara's hair back from her cheek, then met her gaze. Not with thunder, Not the way I thought love was supposed to sound. But yes. Like a river loves its bend. Clara nodded. He never wanted me. Just someone to stay. That's not what I see when he looks at you. Clara smiled faintly. That's because he's not looking at me anymore. The next Sunday, the sisters went to church. Clara wore a hat to shield her skin, her shoulders square despite the trembling beneath them. Boaz walked beside them, his hand gently resting near Hazel's back. Not quite touching, but close enough to feel. The church went silent when they entered. Children stared. Men coughed. Women looked away. Midway through the sermon, Geneva Stroud stood. Her voice, shrill as a rusty hinge, sliced through the chapel. "This is a house of God," she said, "and yet we allow filth to fester in its pews. A woman who couldn't hold a husband. A sister who replaced her like a hand-me-down bonnet. A man with no shame, fattening himself on the attention of two unwanted women." The room gasped. Hazel stood slowly. Her hands trembled, but her voice held. "You don't know what love looks like, Geneva. You only know what it cost. My sister's wound don't define her worth. And I didn't take her place. I stood beside her when no one else did." Geneva scoffed. "Your place is beneath judgment." Hazel took Clara's hand and turned to the congregation. "We never asked for your pity. Just your silence. But if you've got none left to give, we'll build our lives out of your noise." Boaz rose beside them. "She ain't just stitching fabric. She's stitching grace into a world that don't know how to wear it." The church fell into a hush so deep even the flies stilled. Later that evening, Clara sat beside a window, embroidering in slow loops. Hazel swept the floor while Boaz oiled the hinges on the pantry. The smell of potatoes filled the house. "You're both welcome here," Clara said suddenly. "You don't need a preacher to make it real." Boaz paused mid-stroke. Hazel looked up from her broom. Clara smiled. "I think the world's seen enough ceremonies. Love's quieter than all that." The moon was high when Boaz stepped out onto the porch. Hazel followed him. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box. No velvet, no bow. Just wood, worn soft by his thumb. Inside was a silver comb, carved with wildflowers. "Found it at the canyon," he said. "Didn't know why I took it then. I do now." Hazel touched it, then him. Just her fingers on his wrist. "Thank you," she whispered. "For seeing me." Boaz leaned close. "You're the only thing I've ever seen clear." They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. The next morning, Hazel found a note slipped beneath the door, penned in elegant, angry loop. "You may win his heart, but not this town. We don't forget shame. We bury it deep." Hazel read it twice, folded it once, and tucked it into her apron. She smiled. The letter smelled of old perfume and fear.